Good evening and welcome to Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. On the show tonight,
we ran to survive. We ran through bullets.
Mass shooting survivors press lawmakers to take action against guns.
Funding for Far South Side Red Line extension gets a key city council endorsement, but not everyone's on board.
Federal judges often illegally lock up defendants before they go to trial. We dig into a new report.
As the U.S. Postal Service enters its busiest delivery week of the season, concerns about the safety of postal workers arise in light of recent attacks.
The so-called triple-demic of COVID, RSV, and flu is leading to a shortage of prescription medications, especially for children.
What's causing financial issues for the grill company Weber? That and other business news from Cranes.
The healing power of artwork made by a Chicago Vietnam War veteran you won't soon forget.
They feel like their creativity, their passion, their desires are just as important as anybody else's.
And an organization on the South Side is using art therapy to encourage youth in the juvenile justice system.
But first, some of today's top stories. The mayoral campaigns of both Willie Wilson and Jamal Green traded barbs at today's ballot challenge hearings. Green wants Wilson's mayoral petitions tossed for alleged falsified signatures and additionally is challenging Wilson's Chicago residency. Green also says the bribe Willie Wilson's campaign aide allegedly offered so Green would drop his challenge to Wilson should be investigated.
There needs to be a federal investigation into Ricky Hendon and Willie Wilson, especially knowing that Willie Wilson is not going to fire him, and Willie Wilson has paid him almost $500,000 in the last 4 years alone. $500,000 almost. We have the records. And so this is his henchman that he uses to buy people off, and we're exposing it.
3 videos were posted to social media showing former state senator Ricky Hendon offering Green's campaign aide money to drop the legal challenges to Wilson's petitions. But Wilson's lawyer says there was no bribery.
A new poll shows Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia in the lead for Chicago mayor. The poll of 700 likely Chicago voters was conducted from November 10th to the 17th by Impact Research, a firm that includes President Joe Biden among its prominent list of clients. The poll found Garcia would win 25% of the first-round vote set for February 28th, followed by Lightfoot with 18%, sending the two candidates to an April 4th runoff. Lightfoot is followed by Paul Vallis with 14% and Willie Wilson with 10%. According to the poll, 14% of voters are undecided. The poll was commissioned by the International Union of Operating Engineers Local 150, which backed Garcia in the mayor's race after the poll was conducted and has committed $1 million to Garcia's campaign.
Mayor Lori Lightfoot picks the new alderperson for the West Side 12th Ward. Annabelle Abarca, who served as chief of staff to the ward's former alderman, George Cardenas, is tapped as his replacement. Cardenas stepped down after winning election to the Cook County Board of Review in November. If Abarca wins city council approval this week, she will be the first new alderperson of the 12th Ward in nearly 20 years. She'll also face voters on the February ballot.
The South Side is one step closer to building a new $120 million high school. The City Council Finance Committee approved $8 million to help buy land owned by the Chicago Housing Authority at 24th and State Street. That parcel of land was once home to the Harold Ix homes, which were torn down 12 years ago. The location received some pushback because it had been set to be redeveloped into public housing. The $8 million will come from the area's tax increment finance district to also subsidize and design an environmental remediation for the project. Alderman David Moore cast the only dissenting vote at today's Finance Committee. A final vote on the city subsidy for the high school is scheduled for Wednesday's full City Council meeting.
And coming up in the program, protecting postal workers amid a busy holiday season.
But first, survivors of mass shootings push for legislative change. We explain right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
The mother of a teen shot and killed at random. A mom shot twice while attending a patriotic parade. Those and other survivors of gun violence told their stories to lawmakers today as the General Assembly begins to consider new gun control legislation. Amanda Vinicky joins us now with more. Amanda, a lot of heavy stories today.
Yes, Paris, and this has to do with a measure that would ban the future sale of guns defined as assault weapons. And it is many stages from becoming law. But with leading Democrats committed to its passage, legislators today took a first big step, holding their first hearing on the measure. It featured survivors like Lauren Bennett. She was with her family, including her young sons, at the 4th of July parade in Highland Park when she heard what initially sounded like fireworks. It wasn't. It was allegedly a 21-year-old man repeatedly shooting an AR-15 style gun. Bennett was hit twice.
Imagine a hot metal dart-like projectile tearing through your body at supersonic speed, faster than the speed of sound. You'll feel it burn through your skin, and likely you'll grab whatever part of your body was hit because you know something's not right, only to feel that excessive amounts of blood draining out of you and soaking everything. At this point, you most likely feel as if you are dying, maybe wondering if this is how it all ends. I can assure you, that is what I was thinking.
She was hit once in her lower back and hip, then again as she got up to run in her upper back. Still, she moved to get away. The crowd was under attack and bullets were pouring down.
My husband was running with our 6- and 9-year-old boys, literally for their lives, shielding them while exposing himself to shooting bullets because we all know that their innocent young lives are far more precious than our own. These boys dodged bullets, jumped over fallen bodies, while running behind me looking at my blood-soaked body, and they assumed their mother was probably bleeding to death.
Now, she clearly survived, though 7 people did not. Bennett says the trauma, though, will live with her and her family forever. Highland Park Mayor Nancy Rotering says the suspect fired 83 rounds in under 1 minute, using a gun he had legally bought. Rotering says banning weapons like this won't stop all gun violence, but she called it a first common sense step.
Just like we don't allow people to handle nuclear materials or own missile launchers and so on. These weapons are too dangerous for public access. Please help us reclaim our freedom and defend our human right to live.
The package legislators are debating would forbid the future sale of what it defines as assault-grade weapons, as well as switching devices that can turn other guns into them. Those who currently own guns that are on that list would need to register them with the state. But Shakitha Jackson wants lawmakers to go further. Her 17-year-old son, Daviante, was killed in Waukegan in 2016. 6 years later, she still misses him. She says she relives the tragedy, the trial, the autopsy. She can't let go of how Daviante required a closed casket because the assault rifle's bullets so damaged his body.
It is my opinion that assault rifles should be banned, making laws and punishment for those who have chosen to break them be way more harsh than they are now.
Another 2022 holiday, Halloween, another mass shooting, this time in Chicago's East Garfield Park neighborhood. Cantina Phillips was with family members holding a vigil for a relative who died from illness when shots rang out, seemingly, she says, from every direction. She says it felt and sounded like a battle scene. The bullet that tore through her leg was so large, it broke the bone.
We need to do something about the guns, not only the AK-47s, all guns. What would it take?
Whether the assault weapons measure succeeds could be a partial answer to her question. But Jackie Algie, whose teenage son was helping a friend move when he was randomly shot and killed, says it should not take a mass shooting in a Tony suburb to make it happen. She says her heart goes out to Highland Park victims and she prays for them. But she says there's a gulf between the reaction to that and what happens after shootings in communities of color.
In this city, 10 Black kids that were shot and killed that day. There were 62 that were shot and injured. And yet the reaction and the result of what has come from that reaction, both from a local, state, and federal perspective, is far surpasses what we've been given and what has happened to us and to our children and our families and our community.
She says nothing will change unless change is focused everywhere.
Amanda, obviously very compelling testimony today. What about for gun rights advocates or gun shop owners that also want to sort of present their side on this bill?
Paris, they are going to get their chance. This was an initial hearing out of what is expected to be 3 this month before the legislature returns for a lame duck session in January. After the hearing adjourned, though, one man did ask to speak, and legislators let him. This is unusual, by the way. They let him talk informally. And then later, another couple of gun owners also talked with the state representative who is leading this committee hearing. And they told him that there are reasons to have these what are defined as assault grade weapons. They say that farmers use them to shoot predators like coyotes. And also they say there are not shootings in their neighborhoods because they say criminals realize that these homeowners are armed.
All right, we'll see how the debate shapes up on this before they go back to session in January and consider this bill. All right, Amanda, thanks very much. And up next, an update on the long-awaited Red Line extension south. So please stay with us.
Our culture is vibrant, it's rich, it's fun.
We try to focus on, hey, let me help you. This is what Chicago is. This is Little Village.
A controversial plan to help fund the $3.6 billion extension of the CTA Red Line from 95th Street to the city's southern border near 130th is one step closer to happening. The project has been in the works since the 1950s, and it got approval today from City Council's Finance Committee. But not everyone is thrilled about it. WTTW News reporter Heather Sharon joins us now with more. Hey, Heather, all right, $3.6 billion for this long-awaited extension of the Red Line. How will the city pay for this?
Well, they are hoping the federal government will come through with a $2.1 billion grant, but they have to put some skin in the game themselves, and they're going to do that by generating $959 million through a new TIF district.
Tax increment financing district, for viewers that may not hear that anagram all the time. And CTA President Dorval Carter wants this to happen before the end of the year, so he's urging a vote at the full City Council on Wednesday. Why such a rush?
You can imagine that cities across the country want this money. They all have long-delayed infrastructure plans. Remember, there was no federal infrastructure bill under former President Donald Trump, so now the iron is hot. So Dorval Carter told the City Council, give me this money, let me go to Washington, and let me nail down this grant and build this, as you said, long-awaited project.
Right, they need that local match to get that grant. And TIF, it's controversial, as we know. This would be the second such transit-oriented TIF. Tell us how this would work.
So this would be very different than the one that's currently being used to rebuild the Red Line along the north side. Essentially, what this would do would take all of this property tax revenue from 5 downtown wards, including the 3rd and the 11th ward, and take that and move it to the south side of Chicago to build this train tracks. It's 5.6 miles with 4 stations, but on the south side, there just isn't enough property tax revenue to take it from those TIFs, and that's what's making it very controversial.
And it was too controversial for an ally of the mayor, the chair of the City Council Budget Committee, Alderwoman Pat Dowell. She voted against it. How come?
That's right. So it will be her constituents' property tax dollars that are going to go from Bronzeville all the way south to 95th and 130th. And she said that was just too much for her constituents to bear. Now, on the other side, Alderman Nicole Lee, who's the 11th ward, will also help fund this TIF. She voted for it, but she acknowledged that it was a really tough vote, especially since they're all going to face the voters in less than 3 months.
It's been interesting to see this evolve because it seemed like several months ago, the majority of older people were against this. They did have the votes to get out of Finance Committee. Do you think it'll have the votes ultimately in the full City Council?
Well, it's really hard to vote against a project that is designed to correct the structural racism that really marks Chicago's South Side. There's a reason why there's no red line from 95th to 130th Street, and that's because that area of the city has been disinvested for decades, another legacy of modern segregation here in Chicago. The mayor is touting this project as a way to balance those scales. That's also a tough vote against.
Certainly a transit desert down there, and that might focus some minds. Heather, all right, thanks very much.
Thanks, Paris.
And you can read Heather's full story on our website, WTTW.com/news. And now to Brandis and a new report on federal pretrial detention. Brandis.
Paris, thank you. We've covered Illinois' Safety Act law quite a bit over these last few months. a key tenet of it being the elimination of cash bail set to begin January 1st. But for defendants facing trial in federal court, this law would not apply. A new report from the University of Chicago's Federal Criminal Justice Clinic shows that locking up defendants pre-trial has become the norm in federal court rather than the exception as required by law. And just as in state courts, many of those jailed pre-trial in federal courts are Black and brown people and unable to pay bail. Joining us to discuss all this is Allison Siegler, clinical professor of law and founding director of the Federal Criminal Justice Clinic at the University of Chicago. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Brenda.
So briefly first, just to give us a sense of what are the crimes that we're more likely to see prosecuted in federal court versus state?
Absolutely. So state crimes are more like violent crimes, right? Murder, robbery, assault, things like that. In the federal system, we're talking mostly low-level drug crimes and immigration cases. That makes up the majority of the cases, sometimes gun possession, fraud, but it's much less violent, sort of, in fact, only like 2% of federal crimes are considered to be violent. So it's different types of crimes, really, than you see in the state system.
Okay. So when the Bail Reform Act was passed in 1984, it was meant to keep the majority of federal defendants who are awaiting trial out of jail. But your report finds that the rate of people being jailed while awaiting trial has actually skyrocketed since the passage of this act in '84. Tell us what you found.
So, well, first of all, what we found was looking at the publicly available data, we saw that huge skyrocketing of the detention rates, the jailing rates pre-trial, right, from like 20-some% up to 75%. 1 in 4 to 3 in 4 people being jailed pre-trial. But especially what we found is that judges are not following the law that they're supposed to be applying. And in fact, when they violate the law, it's making those pretrial jailing rates go up, and it's also falling especially on poor people of color.
What are your thoughts on why these numbers have increased the way they have?
So, I mean, from what we find, it seems that part of what's increasing these jailing rates is that judges are not adhering to the law. Like, it's like, here's the law, this is what they're supposed to be doing, and instead the practice is all the way over here, some other world that's like completely untethered from what the requirements are. And so when that happens, they're locking people up who they shouldn't be locking up and who there's no basis under the law to lock up.
Is it a lack of awareness for these judges who certainly are responsible for being well aware of what the law is, or, you know, a lot of judges, we hear about the Willie Horton effect and their fear of letting someone out who might commit another crime?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all of that, Brandis. I mean, some of it is absolutely that judges, we found, did not actually fully understand what some of these laws required of them. And then in other instances, I do think that fear is really driving things, but that fear is completely misplaced because the data show that actually when you release somebody pre-trial in a federal case, you know, this person who's presumed innocent, you release them out into the community, it is extraordinarily rare for them ever to, you know, commit a crime while they're on release. You know, it's like 99% of the time everybody does things right. And so it doesn't really make sense, that fear factor, especially in the federal system.
What are the factors that a judge is supposed to weigh when considering whether or not someone should be detained?
Well, so there's a number of factors. One of the things we found, I mean, I'll tell you, one of the things we found is, for example, at the very basic level, judges are supposed to provide lawyers, okay, to represent people at the bail hearings. And we found that in 1/4 of federal courts around this country, judges are not actually providing every single person who's charged with a crime with a lawyer. They're letting them just go into their hearings by themselves, up against a federal prosecutor. So so that's, I mean, just to give you an example of the kinds of things that are happening and that we found.
So, of course, you know, detaining people awaiting federal trial seems to be the norm, despite, you know, the law saying that it should be done, you know, for the worst of the worst. How does this impact communities of color?
So this falls especially hard on communities of color. I mean, we found in our study that people of color were more likely to be unlawfully jailed pre-trial. They were more likely to be deprived of counsel while they were in these hearings. They were more likely to be locked in jail on financial bonds that they could not meet. And we found that twice as many people of color were jailed pre-trial in drug cases in the federal system in our study.
And you earned a lot of this data and this research through the Federal Bail Watching Project. Briefly tell me what that is.
So it's a project that I created in order to investigate the problem of federal pretrial detention, to figure out, you know, why are these jailing rates so high? And what we did was, it's a multifaceted project. The idea was, well, let's go into court, Zoom court during the pandemic, and watch what's happening in these pretrial bail hearings and figure out really what's going on. And so I deputized law students and law professors from other schools, including the University of Chicago, but also Harvard and other schools, to be court watchers and to watch court, take notes on what was happening in court, and then, log their data. And then we interviewed, in addition to watching court in a bunch of different places, we also interviewed people in 36 federal courts to sort of be able to show, okay, the problems we're finding in the court watching are actually substantiated in a much more widespread way across many, many courts.
What are some of the recommendations that you make in your report?
So, the recommendations are fairly simple. The recommendations are judges should be following the law, right? Judges should, very basic. Judges should not be locking people in jail without lawyers. Judges should not be, there's a prohibition in the law. It says you cannot impose a financial condition on somebody, a money bail that they're not able to meet. They're not able to pay. So judges should simply be following that rule. And in drug cases, we say judges need to follow the law and not lock people, not sort of presume that everybody in a drug case needs to be locked in jail. So really, it's about stop following habit and custom, start adhering to the law and the data.
As we mentioned, our state legislature has given Illinois' criminal justice system a major shakeup, a major overhaul, abolishing cash bail that goes into effect early January. How likely is it that Congress might enact federal bail reform anytime soon?
So I think it's pretty unlikely Congress will do that. I think there's a great law, a bill that's been put forward by Senator Durbin. It's got bipartisan support. It's called the Smarter Pretrial Detention for Drug Charges Act, and it would eliminate this sort of presumption of detention in drug cases, which has been found to not work and to create really serious racial disparities in a big government study different from my own. And so that would be great. I don't think it's likely that this Congress is going to pass that anytime soon, unfortunately. But I do think the Illinois law is fantastic. The Illinois law really, what it's doing is fixing the problems, some of the same problems we're seeing in the federal system. It's fixing those by saying, okay, judges aren't actually following. They weren't following the bail law in Illinois. They really weren't, okay? Like judges outside of Chicago, they were not supposed to be locking people in jail without lawyers, but they were. And so this new law comes in and it says, you can't lock people in jail without lawyers. It says unequivocally you can't impose money bails and deprive people of their freedom when they can't pay. And it just makes the law clearer. And it gets rid of the problems that gets rid of the problems that we're seeing in the federal system, frankly.
Sounds like it'll be a while, though, before anybody addresses those problems based on what you're feeling, your sense of what Congress may or may not do. Allison Siegler, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Brandis.
Up next, how a Marine Corps veteran uses artwork to heal his memories of the Vietnam War. Stay with us.
We have a lot more to come on the program, including keeping postal workers safe amid a rise in attacks. But first, in 1968, a U.S. Marine was wounded and evacuated from Vietnam. He returned to Chicago and found his calling making artwork in a way that might be called obsessive. Charles Smith now lives in Louisiana, and he continues to create. Producer Mark Vitale met him on a recent visit back to the city to open a new show at the National Veterans Art Museum. Please be warned, there is a description of violence in this story that may be upsetting.
The basic purpose of the art is to guide the focus and attention to the African American experience so that the world will know the understanding of us as a people from its very early beginning. And that is why the pieces tell the story of a period and time captured in art.
Dr. Charles Smith gave himself the title Doctor to honor a lifetime of experience and knowledge. He's made thousands of these figures from a blend of concrete, wood pulp, and rebar. In the 1990s, his home in Aurora, Illinois became a roadside attraction, and he now runs a heritage museum near New Orleans. "Call me Doc," he said, and told us about his life before he was an artist. Be forewarned, his description of war is harrowing.
And in my life in 1968, when I came home from Vietnam, heavily usage of drugs and marijuana, primarily to stay stable and very much full of hate, for the killing I did of families, women, children, water buffalo, North Vietnamese, BC, anything that didn't have USMC on them, I was killing them. And you feel it in your heart, and you feel the change and the hate taking over you, and after a while you get accustomed to it. That's why they call it PTSD. It don't bother you now, but as you get older and as you come out, it bothers you. I'm under VA care right now for post-traumatic stress and situations of that war, and you never get over it.
He is vocal about what he hasn't seen over the years in terms of political change and leadership.
I'm 82 now, and nothing has changed. Our representatives don't talk to us. They don't include us. They don't come and ask our opinion. What are our major needs? And all I know about a leader is Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Frederick Douglass, and Ida B. Wells, and those people of the past. But today's leader has failed that leadership, and they don't measure up.
Years ago, Smith was a pastor in Tennessee. He no longer ministers at church, but he hasn't stopped preaching.
The calling comes from God because God has always been a part of my life, and God worked with me so, put that art in my heart and say, that's the platform you use. So that's what my art does. It creates conversation, it gives information, and it gives directions in terms on where we need to be at every level, politically, spiritually, personally, community, and that type of a thing. The message must continue to go out. It must continue to pound on what's wrong. I pound on organizations, schools, principals. I'm like the radio. If you don't change the channel or cut it off, I'm going to keep going.
For Chicago Tonight, this is Mark Vitale.
And the exhibition is called Dr. Charles Smith, Holding the Dream in My Hand. It's at the National Veterans Art Museum on the Northwest Side until June 1st. There's more on our website, including the artist's account of meeting Dr. Martin Luther King in Chicago. And now, Brandis, we go back to you.
Paris, thank you. Still to come on Chicago Tonight, a biotech company with a Deerfield outpost is acquired for over $27 billion. That and more from Cranes. It's the U.S. Postal Service's busiest week of the holiday season, but concerns about the safety of postal workers arise in light of recent armed robberies and attacks. The so-called triple-demic has created a perfect storm, causing shortages of prescription medications, especially for children.
They feel like their creativity, their passion, their desires are just as important as anybody else's.
An organization on the South Side is using art therapy to encourage youth in the juvenile justice system. But first, some more of today's top stories. An effort to dump the Illinois Republican Party chair over poor midterm election results fails. Illinois GOP Chairman Don Tracy survives a 4-hour Republican State Central Committee meeting where dozens in the audience spoke against him. Tracy acknowledged the election was, quote, a bitter pill to swallow. But after hearing the opposition, the State Central Committee voted to keep Tracy as head of the state party until 2025. The Illinois Capitol Rotunda has a new addition to the Christmas tree, a creche, and a menorah. The Satanic Temple of Illinois installed their latest holiday display in the Capitol with the hearty Hail Satan. The congregation designed and crocheted apples and a snake laying on a copy of Copernicus's book On the Revolution of the Heavenly Spheres, written in 1543. Since 2018, the Satanic Temple of Illinois has been included in the Capitol holiday displays based on religious freedom. Globally, there are about 500,000 followers who espouse, quote, religious diversity. Is the University of Illinois one step closer in replacing Chief Illiniwek as the school's mascot? The belted kingfisher, a native blue and orange bird, is gaining popularity at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Students have led the Kingfisher campaign for more than 2 years, and according to the official website of the unofficial mascot, it won a campus-wide referendum, a faculty vote, and the student government unanimously endorsed the Kingfisher as the next mascot. Chief Illiniwek was retired in 2007, and the National Congress of American Indians last week endorsed the Democratic effort that's been used to create the new mascot. No word on the bird from the U of I administration yet. New developments in a $120 million high school set to be built on the south side. The City Council Finance Committee approved $8 million to help buy land owned by the Chicago Housing Authority at 24th and State Street. The $8 million will come from the area's tax increment finance district to also subsidize the design and environmental remediation for the project. Alderman David Moore cast the only dissenting vote at today's Finance Committee. A final vote on the city subsidy for the high school is scheduled for Wednesday's full City Council meeting. And now to Paris for some of today's top business headlines. Paris.
Thanks, Brandis. Palatine-based grill company Weber is going private a quick year after their public bid. An autoimmune disease treatment developer with an outpost in Deerfield is being acquired for a whopping $27 billion. And 3 developers are rolling out massive plans for the Fulton Market District, but the prospects of them moving forward are shaky. Here to go behind the headlines is Crane Chicago business reporter Danny Ecker. Danny, good to see you as always. Let's start with Fulton Market, where the proposals seem to be getting taller and taller. Tell us about the most recent ones.
Yeah, the Fulton Market development train just keeps rolling along here. These are 3 big projects set to go before the city's design committee this week. They include almost 2,100 apartments and a 27-story office building. One of the apartment towers would actually rise 52 stories along the northern edge of Fulton Market. That would be the neighborhood's tallest building if it goes through. There's a trio of apartment buildings proposed by a New York developer just north of the Google offices, and then there's a proposal from a Canadian developer, Ani Group, that wants to add an office project along Green Street overlooking the Kennedy. You know, we haven't seen many big projects proposed in Fulton Market that have struggled to get financing. They've done well. That's actually just shows how strong investor demand has been. But the Fulton Market boom has also not overlapped with the kind of interest rates we're seeing now. So that's another challenge. And if these plans move forward, it would be another showcase of the resilience of Fulton Market.
I mean, it seems like the development is there. It's happened fast and furious. So are you saying because of interest rates and the general state of the economy, these projects may not get off the ground?
It's certainly going to be a bigger challenge to finance them, you know, when you're dealing with much higher cost of capital today.
All right, let's talk about another Chicago-based company, Weber Grill. It's going private just a year after it went public. How come the quick turnaround?
Well, it was a pretty short-lived run, yeah. Being a publicly traded company for Weber, it went public in August of last year at $14 a share. And now BDT Capital, the private equity firm based in Chicago, which already owns almost half the company, is buying the rest of it at $8 per share. That deal is actually slated to close early next year. So by the stock price alone, it was not a money-making effort. We're taking this company public. But the reason it went public originally was Weber Grills were doing great early in the pandemic with people holed up at home. And then as demand softened as the pandemic wore on, and especially this year with spending down, that drove down sales. They parted ways with their CEO, and now BDT is going to try to revive this brand as a privately held company again.
So perhaps not as many people buying grills right now post-pandemic. All right, finally, a medical therapeutics company with an outpost in Deerfield. It's being bought up by a giant biotech company. Tell us about this deal.
Yeah, Horizon Therapeutics. It's best known for a drug called Tepezza, which treats an autoimmune condition called thyroid eye disease. Sales of that drug alone actually account for almost half of Horizon's annual sales. And it's got a big presence in the northern suburbs. And many people know it bought and moved to the former Takeda campus in Deerfield in 2020. So Amgen is acquiring it. It's one of the largest independent biotech companies in the world. And this is basically a way to grow its business quickly. We're starting to see more life sciences companies doing deals like this now that they can kind of shift some of their focus away from fighting COVID-19. But it's still not clear yet what this is going to mean for Horizon's presence locally, and that's something we're going to be watching certainly in the new year.
All right, a lot of business stories to watch in the year. Danny Ecker, thank you very much.
Thanks, Paris.
This week is expected to be the busiest delivery week of the holiday season for the U.S. Postal Service. That means postal workers will be out delivering mail and packages that you might be anticipating just in time for the holidays. Boy, I hope they get here in time. But concerns about safety have surfaced in light of recent armed robberies and attacks of postal workers in the city. Not too far from Chicago, Postal Service carrier in Milwaukee was shot and killed Friday while delivering the mail. And joining us is Elise Foster, Vice President of the National Association of Letter Carriers, Branch 11, which represents over 4,800 letter carriers and retirees, including in Chicago. We also invited a representative of the U.S. Postal Service to join us, but they declined. Elise Foster, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And Elise, we should mention you're going to be the incoming president of the union starting next week, so congratulations on that.
Thank you.
All right, so we mentioned the armed robberies and attacks of postal workers in the city. What kind of incidents have you seen in and around Chicago?
Well, just recently, just the tax, we have the tax on letter carriers with the arrow keys, taking packages, whatever they have. They just have to surrender everything to, you know, the robber and just give them everything that they have, you know. So
and the arrow keys, explain that.
Well, the arrow keys are the keys that we use to get into the buildings. They have key keepers in the mailboxes. So with that, and that gives gave them access to get into the buildings to get whatever they want out the mail receptacles, out the blue boxes, the mailboxes. They have access to pretty much everything.
Right, we've heard a lot of cases of this recently. Is this happening more now than in the past, or is this something that's always been going on?
No, I want to say that it's more. I see the uptick in the robberies from August to November. It is an uptick in the carriers being assaulted on their assignments.
Do you see any reason for that particularly?
Well, yeah. Well, you know, some of the things that we deal in the communities, you know, people not having jobs, and they just look for a way out, and they just come and get the goods that the Postal Service had. They see the Amazon, they see the packages and things that, you know, valuables, and then take it and, you know, do whatever they need to make ends meet.
And tragically, up in Milwaukee on Friday, someone shot and killed. What do you know about that incident?
Well, I haven't had any reports in from it, but first I would like to give my condolences to Mr. Cross' family and the letter carriers, the brothers and sisters at the Postal Service from Branch 11. But we just got the recent reports on the 9th that it happened, but we haven't got a full report on the Pacifics. They're still investigating it.
So what is the USPS response here to keep letter carriers safe? What are they doing in light of all these things happening?
Well, just last month we talked to the postal postmaster, and we asked her for more help out here to protect letter carriers. You know, we have a problem with the starting times. The carriers are out there later. They're taking the load on the staffing issue that we have at all carriers now. They work 100% staff. So we're out here working. This is our peak season. Well, like you said, with Christmas, we're trying to make sure everybody gets their packages. And with that being said, the carriers are out there working 11.5 to 12 hours a day. So 12 to 12 is out there. We in pitch dark delivering mail. Daylight savings time started. Time goes back. So we're out there pretty much in the dark, and that's a safety concern. And we ask them, can they do something to help, you know, get us off the street earlier? But we want to make sure that the customers get their mail.
I remember last year around this time I reported on sort of a shortage of workers. Is that still the case? Is there a lack of enough mail carriers out there to deal with all these routes and to maybe not have them out there at night?
Well, I would say no. We don't have enough. The Postal Service is trying their best to hire employees and get them on board, but the process is lengthy. But we are short carriers, and the ones that come to work each and every day to do the work, they're out there working 12, 13 hours to get the mail delivered to the customer. So we're out there, but we are short-staffed.
I know last year, the year before, COVID was an issue too. A lot of folks out, and so that's contributing to the short staffing. Is that still a contributor as well?
Well, not more, but we do have cases where carriers are, you know, being stricken with COVID and they have to take off. And when they take off, we don't have the replacements, you know. We don't have them fast enough coming in as they're going out. But that's something that letter carriers deal with COVID, and they have to take off.
Getting back to the arrow key robberies, what can you say to customers that are worried about their packages from Amazon or wherever, their valuables falling prey to this?
Well, we just tell the customers that the letter carrier has to protect themselves and they have to be safe. And they've been instructed to, if the robber wants it, give it to them, it can be replaced. And then hopefully they make the report, we can get that to the Postal Service, and hopefully we can get to the company, they can get it replaced. But the letter carrier safety is always first.
And speaking of the safety of the letter carrier, is there recourse for a letter carrier that does get robbed on the job or robbed at gunpoint or harassed or attacked like that? What does the USPS offer for them?
Well, we have the Federal Employee Compensation Act, which is injury compensation, where they can report a claim and put an injury in. And the Postal Service also has the EAP assistance program that's available to them and their families so they can talk about those issues that they're facing. So we do have those programs in place.
In the next week or two, it's going to be a busy week, as we know. What are you expecting?
Well, I hope that we get the packages delivered, we get out there and we get the carriers safe home. You know, like I said, the letter carriers, we're the number one deliverer at the end of the day to deliver ourselves home to our families. And we just hope that we can just get everybody off the street timely and all our customers served.
All right, so beyond like working in the dark and working 12 hours, are you hearing anything else from your letter carriers that are concerns?
We just want early starting times. We got to get those starting times changed to get the carrier off the street. There never was an issue when I started. That we started early, in and out, and that's what we want.
So how come you don't have the early starting times now?
Well, it's with automation and processing of the mail and how they can't get the mail to the carriers early. This is what we have been told, and that, you know, we have to spend more time on the street versus in the station, and they just want us to get out there and just do more.
All right, the early bird gets the worm, or early and often, that's the key here.
Yes.
All right, Elise Foster, thanks very much. Best of luck.
Thank you.
And up next, a shortage of children's medicine. But first, we take a look at the weather.
A surge in respiratory illnesses caused by COVID-19, the flu, and RSV has created a triple-demic, leading to shortages of prescription medications, especially for children. Pharmacies across the country are seeing surging demand for child-friendly versions of amoxicillin, Tamiflu, and other drugs. That demand has led, at times, to empty shelves and parents having to try multiple pharmacies to find their child's prescription. Joining us now to share their insights are Sterling Elliott, clinical pharmacist and assistant professor of orthopedic surgery at Northwestern University's School of Medicine, and Dr. Samir Patel, a pediatric infectious disease specialist at Lurie Children's Hospital. Gentlemen, thanks to you both for joining us. Sterling, let's start with you, please. Sure. We've got, this triple threat of respiratory illnesses, but why are children being particularly impacted by these shortages versus adults?
Well, I think it just comes down to the fact that for children, many of them aren't yet ready to swallow capsules or tablets. And so liquid formulations are top of mind to mom and dad, and it's what everybody thinks of. And so as the demand just flies and the supply can't keep up, we get into a situation where we see what the shelves look like right now.
It seems like we're on the flip side of something as well. Early on in the pandemic, obviously, we were very concerned about the older population and protecting them. And now we have the situation where children are more impacted, where we're more concerned about them and getting them medicated.
It is, because I think that's the area where we've seen this shortage now. And I think, everybody shudders when they think of children not having the ability to get better and not having what we need. And parents are fearful of, how can I help my kids get better? And so I think that's a perfect storm for bringing it skyrocketing up to the public's attention.
Dr. Patel, how would you describe your level of concern over these shortages?
It certainly is very frustrating to the families and to treating physicians. We've had many situations where the clinicians in our urgent care centers, emergency room, and affiliated clinics have prescribed antibiotics for common conditions like ear infections or throat infections, and the families have struggled to obtain the proper formulation to treat young children. We also have situations where we have to use alternative antibiotics to compensate for the decreased supply, which those antibiotics themselves we're running low on. It's not a situation where at this point we're going to run out of all options, but it's totally altering our preferred way of treating infections.
How does that impact a patient's care if, for example, a parent can't find a particular drug that's been prescribed and a doctor may have to consider prescribing something else?
Well, in some situations, there may be delays in obtaining the antibiotic, either through an alternate pharmacy or obtaining a specially compounded preparation. We'll have to use an alternate antibiotic, which may have different side effects than we prefer, which, for example, diarrhea and some of the other antibiotic options. It may lead to increased risk of acquiring antibiotic-resistant organisms because we're using more broad spectrum antibiotics, more potent antibiotics than we prefer to use. So this certainly has made antibiotic prescribing challenging.
Okay. Sterling, is it just particular medicines that are used to treat, respiratory illnesses that are in short supply, or are we seeing broader shortages?
Oh, no, I mean, we're seeing broader shortages. I think what's bringing it to the public's attention is the fact that it's children, like I said. But no, we're looking at broader shortages and different classes of medications. In fact, we've been managing shortages in the pharmacy world for at least 5, if not more, years.
Yeah, because we've also heard of shortages of like Adderall, for example, which is not used to treat respiratory illness.
No, and that's a shortage that I think has come up top of mind in a few years back. We also had a shortage going on of an anticoagulant called heparin, and remember at that time there was some talk of having to limit the number of cardiac surgeries that go on in a day because you need that drug in order to anticoagulate the blood.
Dr. Patel, should drug manufacturers have been able to anticipate this surge in demand?
It's the situation with the rise in 3 different viruses at the same time is unprecedented. The effects of the COVID-19 mitigation measures of social distancing and masking altered the circulation of viruses in the United States, which we typically would see most of them in winter months. The fact that they've now occurred earlier at a time that we did not expect fully makes it hard for drug companies to have anticipated that at this point in the year they would have seen increased demand, which they typically seen in other parts of the year.
Sterling, how rare are these kinds of shortages? You mentioned the heparin some years ago.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I don't want to call them rare. They rise with some measure of frequency. Fortunately, we are generally able to come up with plans and come up with strategic approaches to how to make sure we manage a more limited supply. And quite frankly, that's what you end up doing in this scenario as well. So it doesn't really change that way. But unfortunately, in the recent history, we have seen a number of these have to be managed.
Is this just prescribed meds? Because I did a quick search, before this show, and Tylenol, children's Motrin, those are hard to get. And as a mother of small kids, I feel the need to start hoarding.
No, you know what? I'm glad you mentioned that because this is very important. First of all, no, it's not. Obviously, it's not prescribed. All prescribed meds. Some of the prescribed meds are subject to this, but Tylenol and ibuprofen are perfect examples of that. But I think it's really important that we don't hoard. And as hard as it is to hear that, I think it's very important because we're now talking about having to be a community to help take care of our children. And I think that it becomes important that all of us use it responsibly. It goes without saying with any medication, but we all need to use it responsibly. And that means making sure that parents of small children have the ability to pick these things up so that they can feel comfortable about caring for their kids, and their kids can feel comfortable that they're going to get better.
Dr. Patel, what should a parent do if they've been prescribed medication for their child, but they're struggling to find it?
Well, they can talk to their pediatrician about alternate preparations that can be re-prescribed either at their pharmacy or a neighboring pharmacy. There may be alternate options for antibiotics that they could talk to their pediatrician about. And another thing to keep in mind they should discuss with the pediatrician is that even though there is an increase in viruses causing fevers in children and illnesses, antibiotics are used to treat bacterial infections, not viral infections, and that in many situations when the child most situations has a fever infection, it's due to a viral cause. The reason why we're using antibiotics more because of these increasing viral infections is because sometimes we do not make that distinction between, or it's difficult to do, particularly in young children. So in many situations, that illness with the fever may be managed by supportive care alone.
Dr. Patel, we've got about 15 seconds left. What can people do to help reduce the pressure on the system?
Please get vaccinated for flu and COVID-19 to reduce any risk of illnesses. Practice good hand washing and wear masks in crowded situations, including family gatherings.
Okay, advice from Dr. Samir Patel and Sterling Elliott. Thanks to you both for joining us.
Thanks very much for having us.
Up next, art therapy for young people who've been incarcerated. Stay with us. We first introduced you to Sky Art at the beginning of the pandemic with its art therapy model helping communities process life experiences. Since then, it's continued that model with a practice that's helping former and currently incarcerated youth. Arts correspondent Angel Edo takes us back to Sky Art, this time with an introduction to one of its newer programs.
Just Us. That's the name of a program created by Sky Art to create a safe space for youth ages 14 to 21 in the juvenile justice system. And instead of talk therapy, they're utilizing art therapy.
Youth are oftentimes over-therapized is a term we use, where they have to tell their story and recount their trauma over and over and over again, sort of mandated, right? So we actually try to reverse that a little bit, and instead of sort of expecting them to recount their trauma, we actually invite them in to express those things in a different way.
Director of Programs Devin Van Houten Maldonado says it's a program that began right after the pandemic. And through their partnership with the Illinois Department of Justice, they're able to visit 3 different facilities on a weekly basis to practice this model.
Black and brown kids are over-criminalized from the time that they're born. Oftentimes they have low self-esteem. They have not received the nurturing that they deserve through foster care system, through poorly funded education. And so when we start making work with them, they say, I can't do this, I don't know how. And so that's why we say, do whatever you can do. Make lines, make marks, make colors. Maybe the only thing they've ever drawn is a gang marking. And so we let them start there, and then eventually what's beautiful is they let us help them cover those things up. And then eventually they gain skills of just drawing, of abstract thinking. And so for these kids, they're learning art skills that are more about critical thinking, thinking about why we're making what we're making.
One of their longest participating members, who currently resides at the Illinois Youth Center, says before entering the program, he only saw drawing as something to do when bored.
At first, I didn't normally look at it as a coping mechanism. I'm bored, I'm finna doodle. But now, I can clear my mind and just focus on this, on what I want to draw.
He has gained great confidence as an artist. And the collaborative piece is really important as well. These are youth who oftentimes feel like they can't rely on anybody. They've been told that they don't have a lot of value. And so them working together and working with us, again, it just helps to deconstruct that power dynamic a little bit.
21-year-old Adam Martinez joined the program at 18. He's since been released and is working a full-time job. And while he doesn't make art as much anymore, he says the lessons he learned while in the program still have an impact on him.
I do find it therapeutic because, when I'm drawing or painting, I'm just in my own space, doing whatever I want, what's going on in my head. A lot of times when you're in there, you're just on the unit all day, seeing the same faces. That's when people start getting into trouble. You got something to look forward to. You want to be on your best behavior because you want to make sure you get to go to the program.
All of their work is on display in a new 3-part exhibition titled Can You See Me? It features work by the youth the program works with, as well as contemporary artists.
Especially as a juvenile, you don't always know what you're doing. You're just out with your peers. After some time, you just realize you can't choose who you grew up around, who you grew up with, or where you grew up at. It's just your environment. Some people grow out of that, though.
On one front, we're creating access to those folks, we'll call them contemporary art viewing folks, right? That audience is going to have very little experience or understanding or knowledge about incarceration and youth incarceration. Putting the work by the youth alongside the contemporary artists, we're placing the same value on them as the work by the contemporary artists, and I think the contemporary artists actually would say the same thing.
For Chicago Tonight, I'm Angel Edo.
And you can see the exhibit at one of its 3 locations through December 16th. Visit our website for more information. We're back to wrap things up right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by Alexandra and John Nichols, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
And that's our show for this Monday night. Don't forget to stay connected with us by signing up for our daily briefing. And you can get Chicago Tonight streamed on Facebook, YouTube, and our website, WTTW.com/news.
You can also get the show via podcast and the PBS video app. And please join us tomorrow night live at 7. A growing number of counties are at high risk for COVID-19. The state's top doctor on safe practices ahead of the holidays.
And U.S. scientists are set to announce a nuclear fusion breakthrough, what it could mean for clean energy efforts. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman.
And I'm Paris Schutz. Thank you for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a great evening.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm pleased to give back to the community through numerous charitable initiatives.